in 1600, on a bloody October morning at the Battle of Sekigahara, the world of the young, respected 17-year-old warrior Miyamoto Musashi suddenly disintegrated. The ground vanished beneath his feet as his security, certainties, and even his sense of identity were brutally destroyed. His powerful clan was decimated, his army massacred, and his high social standing was ruined, turning to dust. He was forced to flee like a common criminal just to survive, marking the darkest period in the life of the man who would eventually become the greatest samurai in Japanese history. What is truly fascinating, however, is that this brutal, humiliating fall was not the end of his story, it was the beginning. In the following years, lost in the Japanese forests and living as a solitary wanderer, Musashi developed 5 profound mental rules. These rules not only saved his life but also created a code of conduct so powerful that, even 4 centuries later, they can pull anyone out of the depths of despair. This isn't vague philosophy or cheap self-help. These are principles tested on the battlefield, forged in the deepest pain a human can endure. The first rule goes against everything you've learned about handling pain. The second will surprise you with its brutal simplicity. And the 5th rule is so counterintuitive that most people refuse to accept it, yet it truly works. Before diving into these rules, consider how many people you know are trapped in a life they don't want, pretending everything is fine while internally everything is falling apart. If this resonates with you, it's not a sign of weakness, but of courage, because admitting the need for change is the vital first step out of that hole. Take a deep breath and come along, because what you're about to learn could be the difference between remaining stuck in a cycle of suffering, and finally, finding the strength to rebuild your life from scratch. If it worked for a 17-year-old who lost everything in a medieval war, it can work for you. Let us return to the plain of Sekigahara in October 1600. In 6 hours of intense fighting, the most important battle in Japanese history, Musashi's army of 80,000 warriors was destroyed, with tens of thousands killed and severed heads scattered across the countryside. Musashi managed to escape, but for a samurai, escaping was a humiliation, not a victory. In their code, dying honorably in combat was preferable to living as a coward. As a teenager who had lost everything and whose identity was shattered in a single morning, most people would have either committed suicide to preserve honor or spent their lives drinking, regretting, and hiding from shame. Musashi chose a different path, one that would change the entire samurai philosophy. The first rule is to accept the harsh reality. Musashi stopped resisting what had happened. While this sounds simple, accepting a brutal reality is one of the hardest things a human can do because our brain is programmed to reject pain. When something terrible occurs, the initial reaction is denial. This can't be happening, followed by anger. This is unfair, and then negotiation. If I do this, maybe things will return to normal. Musashi skipped all these steps, looked at the wreckage of his life, and simply asked, okay, this is what it is now. Now what? There was no why me. Or this shouldn't have happened, only the explosive question, and now what? This change in focus is powerful because when you stop fighting what has already happened, all the energy wasted in resistance is freed up for action. It's the difference between screaming the house shouldn't be on fire and running for the exit. Acceptance is not passivity. It is strategy. A Harvard study following people who experienced severe trauma, job loss, divorce, death in the family, found that the people who recovered the fastest and suffered the least were those who accepted the new reality most quickly, because acceptance frees you to ask the most important question. Since this has already happened, what is my next step? Ask yourself now, what are you trying to deny in your life? Until you accept where you are, you can't go where you want to be. After accepting his new reality, Musashi faced the second great temptation, the desperate search for immediate relief. When suffering, lost, and without purpose, the intense agony makes anything promising to relieve the pain tempting: alcohol, food, sex, entertainment, or drugs, anything to forget, even if only for a few hours. In feudal Japan, masterless samurai, ronin, often succumbed to becoming drunken vagrants, compulsive gamblers, or dishonorable mercenaries, the natural destiny for those who had lost everything. Musashi rejected this path, establishing the second rule: reject debilitating pleasures. Instead of seeking solace, he chose the most difficult path: extreme discipline. He began living like a warrior monk, sleeping outdoors, eating only what was necessary, and training for 8 hours a day, practicing his sword, meditating, studying, and writing. Every day was a battle against the temptation of easy comfort. Modern science supports this. A neuroscientist at Stanford discovered that seeking immediate pleasure when in pain does not solve the problem. It amplifies it. People who indulged after trauma had even higher levels of the stress hormone cortisol over time because the brain realizes it is running away from the problem, not solving it, creating more anxiety. This is like putting out a fire with gasoline. It feels like temporary relief, but the fire gets worse. Conversely, those who chose discipline recovered faster and emerged stronger. Musashi knew that the suffering he chose to endure discipline was different from the suffering that had been imposed upon him, the war's aftermath. One is random and destructive, the other is intentional and constructive. If you must suffer, and you will, because life involves suffering, at least choose the suffering that strengthens you instead of the suffering that destroys you. Training discipline hurts initially, but every day you overcome temptation, you grow stronger. Every no to what is easy is a yes to who you want to become. Musashi later summarized this. The path is one of daily discipline in small things. Small choices every day between what is easy and what is right, like waking up on time or doing what needs to be done. Ask yourself, what is your addiction? What do you use to escape the pain, knowing deep down it is hurting you? Until you cut that off, you cannot develop the third rule. In 1612, Musashi was on Ganryu Island, preparing for the most famous duel in Japanese history against Sasaki Kojiro, the demon of the longsword, a technically perfect, lightning-fast swordsman obsessed with killing him. The crowd and the gamblers were nervous, knowing one would die. Musashi deliberately arrived 3 hours late while Kojiro was on the beach, warming up, nervous, and focused on the duel. Musashi, meanwhile, was calmly carving a wooden sword. When he finally appeared, Kojiro exploded in rage, shouting, cursing, and seething with hatred. Musashi, calm with controlled breathing and a clear mind, won the 30-second duel. The technically superior Kojiro died with his skull crushed by Musashi's wooden sword. The reason for the outcome is the third rule. Your emotions are your enemy. Kojiro fought with anger. Musashi fought with justification. This was the difference between life and death. Modern culture says, follow your feelings, trust your heart. But Musashi discovered what modern neuroscience confirms. Your emotions are terrible advisors. A Harvard researcher found that 87% of the decisions people regretted most were made in intense emotional states: anger, fear, sadness, euphoria. When overwhelmed by a strong emotion, your judgment collapses. Your emotions were designed for emergencies. They are alarms, not a GPS. Fear is useful when being attacked by a lion because it makes you run. But when rebuilding your life, letting fear rule will only paralyze you. Musashi developed a technique he called the imperturbable mind, meaning he didn't stop feeling emotions, but he didn't let them decide for him. Think of yourself as the pilot of an airplane. Your emotions are the passengers. They can scream and panic, but you are in control. If you let the passengers try to fly the plane, everyone dies. Musashi's simple technique was the rule of 10 seconds. Every time he felt a strong emotion, he counted to 10 before acting. He took a deep breath, letting the emotional wave, which like all waves comes, peaks, and subsides, pass. This works for anything: anger, fear, or sadness. In that 10-second gap, you ask yourself, what would the most rational version of me do right now? And then you act based on reason, not emotion. It may feel cold or robotic, but it works. If you want to rebuild your life, you need to learn to be the pilot, not the passenger. The paradox is that when you stop being a slave to your emotions, you become freer to feel them fully because you know you can feel them without being controlled. You can be sad without making stupid decisions. You possess the ability to experience anger without causing destruction, and fear without succumbing to paralysis. Your emotions should serve as information, not orders. However, anxiety remains a potent adversary until you master control over it. Yet, an even more dangerous force exists, one that can dismantle every achievement, a perilous self-obsession rooted in reliving past traumas. Even the legendary Musashi, after years of disciplined wandering, faced this subtle enemy. Overwhelmed by loneliness, his days became a monotonous drag, leading to a destructive obsession where he constantly replayed the Battle of Sekigahara, fixating on every mistake and agonizing over what he should have done. This constant rumination was a self-inflicted wound, destroying him from within. It is a deadly trap. When life collapses, the natural tendency is to direct 100% of your focus inward to your pain, your history, and your suffering, becoming imprisoned by toxic circular thinking. Musashi, however, discovered a crucial insight, summarized in Rule 4. Stop being the center of the universe. Recognizing self-obsession as a prison, he made the radical decision to expand his mind beyond his own pain. He immersed himself in philosophy, art, poetry, architecture, calligraphy, painting, and sculpture. He traveled Japan, engaging with different cultures and teachers, literally forcing his brain to become interested in things greater than his personal suffering. An extraordinary transformation occurred. The more he learned about the world, the smaller his pain appeared. The pain itself hadn't diminished, but he had gained perspective, the same way a rock that seems like a giant obstacle up close is merely a small detail from the peak of a mountain. Modern neuroscience supports this, showing that focusing exclusively on problems activates the same brain areas associated with chronic depression. In contrast, exposure to completely new knowledge forms new neural connections that turn off the circuits of suffering, giving the mind alternatives to focus on besides pain. Musashi intuitively understood that a small mind only sees small problems, while an expanded mind perceives invisible solutions. He even employed a brilliant exercise, dedicating at least an hour daily to learning something completely unrelated to his current emotion, studying mathematics when sad, practicing calligraphy when angry, or observing nature when anxious. The goal was to train his mind to break the cycle of suffering and connect with something immense. The brutal truth is that your suffering, however real, is a microscopic fragment of the human experience. And it is a waste of the world's vastness to remain trapped in a short narrative about your pain. Broadening your perspective offers hope by showing that your problems are not unique, and it reveals untapped mental resources that were previously inaccessible due to preoccupation with suffering. Musashi turned this mental expansion into a competitive advantage, becoming unpredictable and creative because, unlike other warriors who only studied fighting, he studied everything. You can achieve exponential problem-solving ability by feeding your mind with new ideas instead of dwelling on problems. Despite achieving unparalleled success, including writing the Book of 5 Rings, Musashi revealed in a letter that his most dangerous, invisible enemy was envy. Even after years of discipline and expanded perspective, comparing his pain amid the apparent happiness of others consumed him. Seeing other samurai who hadn't lost everything in the war led to the poisonous question, why do they have everything and I have nothing? This constant comparison destroys progress because there will always seem to be someone better. This led him to his final rule, the 5th rule. Gratitude is a weapon specifically. Strategic gratitude, not false positive thinking. Musashi began training his mind to focus on what he had, life, health, freedom, knowledge, opportunity, rather than what he had lost. Science confirms this is not merely feeling good. It literally reprograms the brain to function better, with a University of California study showing that trauma survivors who spent 15 minutes a day thinking about what they still had showed reduced fear and increased reasoning ability along with higher levels of dopamine and serotonin. Crucially, this must be specific gratitude, for example. I am grateful that my body endured 6 hours of training, not just I'm grateful for my health. Forcing the brain to focus on what is working instead of what is broken. Musashi used this strategy not just to feel better, but as a mental edge in battle. Warriors focused on what they had already accomplished, fought with a calm, confident, and imperturbable presence, unlike those who fought from fear. Gratitude generates mental abundance, which leads to better decisions and creates a virtuous cycle, whereas envy creates mental scarcity and a vicious cycle of desperate decisions. A grateful brain functions better, sees opportunities others miss, and thus achieves more. Musashi's hidden ultimate rule is that he never tried to return to who he once was. While many in crisis obsess over getting their old life back, Musashi understood that life was over, and trying to resurrect the dead was futile. Instead, he asked, what kind of person can I become with the knowledge I now have? He chose to become a warrior philosopher, using his pain as raw material to construct a completely new legendary version of himself. The destruction of his life created the conditions for his legend. This applies to your life. What if your previous normal life was a gilded cage that kept you from your true potential? The crisis you face may be the universe forcing you to evolve into a version of yourself you didn't know was possible. Real growth happens under pressure, and adversity strengthens character and develops latent superpowers. Musashi used his worst experience as fuel. These 5 rules: accept reality, reject shortcuts, control emotions, broaden perspective, and cultivate gratitude are the map he left behind. The final challenge is to stop trying to fix your broken life and start building a new one. The choice is simple. Spend the rest of your life regretting the life you lost, or spend it building the person you can still become. A broken life is not a curse, but an opportunity in disguise. And on the other side of the courage to accept it awaits the version of you that is truly meant to be born.